What's up, sports fans? This is the NCAA College Sports Channel. It is time to give you my official big takeaways from week number 13 of the 2025 college football season. I think week 13 was really how everybody expected it to go. Just a pretty quiet weekend overall in the 2025 season. And now we're heading into the last weekend of regular season play. Yes, week 14 this weekend, rivalry weekend, one of my favorite weekends of college football that I look forward to every year. And I think this was kind of just a sleeper weekend before we head into maybe a chaotic weekend in week number 14. And we're also really counting down to conference championship weekend and then also selection Sunday. So we got one more week of regular season play, but we do got some takeaways here from week number 13. Again, just a quiet weekend overall in week number 13. Not a lot of big games happened over the weekend. There were a couple of big games, like maybe three. You had Oklahoma and Missouri. That was a top 25 matchup in the SEC. You had Oregon and USC, a top 15 matchup in the Big Ten. And then you had Georgia Tech and Pittsburgh. That was not a top 25 matchup, but those are probably the three matchups that we kept an eye on the most. But let's go ahead and show you my important takeaways here from week number 13. And I only had 4 takeaways for this week, so no official 5 takeaways from this week. So let's get started here with takeaway number 1. It's down to a 3-way tie in the ACC. So I think it's down to officially these 3 teams in the ACC for a spot in the ACC championship, but also potentially a spot in the college football playoff, or maybe it could be like 4, because I feel like Miami is still alive in this conversation because they just have 2 losses, but they have a couple of conference losses in the ACC. So I think if they beat Virginia Tech this upcoming weekend, that's an automatic bid to the ACC championship. Obviously, the big story is Pitt beating Georgia Tech. That was the big story from last night, I should say. And I was honestly surprised of how Pittsburgh won this game. Not because they won. I wasn't too shocked that they won this game, but also the way they played. The running game was sensational. Defensively, they started off pretty strong. But they did have some, penalties that kind of cost them in this game, and that kind of allowed Georgia Tech to kind of make it a little bit closer at the end. But Georgia Tech also made some mistakes. Haynes King throwing the pick 6. That was a big game changer there. Obviously Georgia Tech had some, flags on them as well. So yeah, Pittsburgh definitely was the better team overall. Again, Georgia Tech nearly came back in this game, but it just wasn't enough, and Pittsburgh defeated them 42-28. SMU took care of business against Louisville, so they're now in a position to probably make it back to the ACC championship in 2 years in a row. So you look at these 3 teams. I think all 3 of these teams, in order for them to make it to the ACC championship, I think if Virginia beats Virginia Tech this weekend, which I think that one's on the road or maybe it's at home. I don't really know. I have to look at the schedule and see. Maybe it's at home if I can't remember, but yeah, I think Virginia wins. They're in pretty good shape. Pittsburgh, if they beat Miami this weekend, I think they're in pretty good shape. The problem is, though, for SMU, I think they'll have to see Pittsburgh lose to Miami, because I feel like SMU is still going to be ahead of a 2-loss Miami team, because they beat them head-to-head already. And then if SMU and Pittsburgh both lose, then I think that opens the door for Miami. But are they going to be really putting a 2-loss Miami team, a conference loss Miami team, possibly at 6-2, SMU at 6-2? Are they going to keep SMU in second place for the head-to-head matchup? That's obviously a lot of questions to be answered. Maybe Miami jumps ahead of them because they have the better overall record, but I really don't think it should come down to overall records. I think it really does come down to your conference record and then also head-to-head. So that's the scenarios that do have to play out here in the ACC this week. Again, I think if Virginia wins, they're in pretty good shape. Pittsburgh beats Miami, which I think they have to go on the road to play that game, so that's going to be pretty tough there for the Panthers. But kind of based off of what I saw yesterday, Pittsburgh looking like a pretty good team, and then SMU, they still have a pretty good shot as well. So yeah, if SMU loses to Cal, I think they're definitely out of it, but if Pittsburgh loses to Miami and SMU beats Cal, I think SMU jumps ahead of Pittsburgh and Miami both. So yeah, I think that's going to have to play out. I think if SMU and Pittsburgh both lose, then Miami jumps into that second place spot, but if Pittsburgh does beat, Miami, I think they stay in second place and they do make it to the ACC title. If SMU loses to Cal, that really could shake things up. But if Pittsburgh does lose to Miami, then I think SMU does jump into that second place spot, and that will be enough to make it to the conference championship. So yeah, it's down to a three-way tie for these three teams, I think, in order to make it to the ACC title. Again, Virginia, I think if they win their final game against Virginia Tech, they're in good shape. Pittsburgh, if they win, they're in good shape. SMU and Miami, that's really going to come down to a tiebreaker, but they would need a lot of help, to be honest. So it's down to a three-way tie for all these three teams in the ACC. Moving on to takeaway number 2, there will be a lot of playoff conference hopes on the line in the SEC this week. So you look at all the 7 of these teams in this conference in the SEC. You got Texas A&M, Georgia, Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, and Texas. And I know people are saying, why is Texas in this? Look, Texas has 3 losses, and those 3 losses, I mean, one of them came to Florida, which is obviously a bad team, but they do have a win over Oklahoma. If you don't remember that game, they beat Oklahoma back in October, and if they beat Texas A&M this week, is the committee going to keep a 3-loss Texas team out? Well, I don't know. I mean, they lost pretty badly to Georgia, so I just wonder if the committee will put a Texas team, a 3-loss Texas team in, especially after taking a beating from Georgia, because they did penalize them a lot, but they didn't really penalize them out of the top 20, if that does make sense, because what really keeps them in the top 20 is basically the win over Oklahoma. So the committee, I think, really likes Texas a lot, and that's kind of the same thing with Miami, because Miami's sitting there with 2 losses. The committee definitely likes them a lot, and they're sitting there as the 11th seed in the college football playoff. You look at Texas A&M, though, if they beat Texas, they're pretty much in good shape. I think even if they lose the SEC championship, I still think they'll probably get that first round bye. Georgia's probably in good shape. I think if they, beat Georgia Tech, they'll likely make it in. I mean, obviously, if they lose to Georgia Tech, then I think they will be definitely in. Ole Miss probably in great shape. I mean, if they lose the Egg Bowl, are they going to penalize Ole Miss for losing to a 5-6 Mississippi State team? That obviously could come into play, and I heard that Lane Kiffin's going to make his decision about his future, if he's going to stay at Ole Miss or he's going to leave Ole Miss for next year. So yeah, that's obviously a big storyline there. It could be a distraction to the players. Alabama, Oklahoma, and Vanderbilt. I think Alabama has to beat Auburn in order to make it to the SEC championship, because what if Alabama loses to Auburn? Then that probably opens the door for Georgia to possibly jump into the SEC championship, because Georgia beat Ole Miss head-to-head, so that's the reason why Georgia should jump ahead in the SEC championship. I mean, Ole Miss definitely would not jump them because, Georgia beat them head-to-head, but, Alabama beat Georgia head-to-head, but they will have 2 losses. So, yeah, if Alabama loses this weekend, I think Georgia jumps into the SEC title game. For Alabama, if they lose this weekend, then I think they're out of the playoff. I don't think a 3-loss Alabama team is going to make it in. So, Alabama definitely has to bring their A game in Jordan-Hare Stadium, one of the toughest places to play in college football. So, again, Alabama definitely is on the verge of being eliminated. If they lose this weekend, I think they're definitely eliminated. So, yeah, their playoff hopes are definitely on the line, but also their conference championship hopes. You look at Oklahoma and Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt took care of business against Kentucky. I feel like Vanderbilt's being disrespected by the committee a lot because they're sitting there at number 14. I think probably at number 15. I can't remember where they're ranked. Yeah, it's showing 14. So, yeah, they're ranked number 14 in the playoff rankings, and they're right behind Miami, who is like a 2-loss team. And I get that Miami's playing pretty good football, but you look at Vanderbilt, they've been playing really good as of late as well. Now, I think what keeps Vanderbilt from being in the playoff will definitely be the game against Tennessee. That is looking like a pretty tough game, and that one is on the road. So yeah, if Vanderbilt loses that game, then that's going to cost them their playoff spot. If they win that game, I think the committee has to look at that win and say, yeah, Vanderbilt deserves to get in the college football playoff. Oklahoma, if they win out, I think they're automatically in. We saw them beat Missouri yesterday 17-6. Kind of a tough game for Oklahoma, but they were able to kind of respond in the second half. They stopped that running game of Missouri pretty well in the second half of that game. They were running all over this Oklahoma defense, but yeah, the Sooners did just enough in order to, get past Missouri. Now, it's not going to be a great win for Oklahoma. It was kind of a flat performance, but I think either way, they'll win out, go 10-2. They beat LSU this weekend, and I think you're automatically in. So a lot of playoff and conference hopes are on the line here in the SEC as we head into rivalry weekend. Again, Texas A&M has to play Texas. Georgia will play Georgia Tech. Ole Miss plays Mississippi State. Alabama plays Auburn. You got Oklahoma playing LSU. I think Vanderbilt definitely is going to have probably the trickiest one. I think Vanderbilt and Alabama are definitely, there's like a ton of pressure for both of these teams, and then probably same thing with Texas A&M and probably, Texas, to be honest. So, yeah, we'll see what happens here. That's takeaway number 2. Moving on to takeaway number 3. And we go to the Big Ten. USC is now out, and Big Ten now is down to get to 3 or 4 teams in. So USC, I think, is now out of the playoff, especially after losing to Oregon. And now the Big Ten, it seems like it's down to probably to get 3 or 4 teams in the college football playoff. So I think Indiana and Ohio State, they're pretty much in good shape. They're both 11-0. They will probably meet in the Big Ten championship. It's looking very likely. Both of those teams ranked number 1 and number 2, respectively. You look at Oregon. They beat USC yesterday, 42-27. I think the final score in that one. Yeah, I was impressed with Oregon in this game. I was impressed with Dante Moore and the entire offense. Defensively, they pretty much did a good job in the second half. But USC did hang around in this game for quite some time. At one point it was a 7-point game, and then the turnover started to pile up and the mistakes by, USC's offense. It started to pile up from there. So yeah, this was a physical game. I think it was pretty dead even matchup. I think Oregon definitely has a slight talent advantage, but still, Oregon did kind of show us that they're definitely not giving up, and they're still a very talented football team. So I think Oregon now, they're pretty much in good shape, even though they got to play Washington this weekend in Seattle. Yeah, that's going to be a pretty tough game, but still, I think Oregon probably still makes it in as an at-large. Michigan, on the other hand, they took care of business against Maryland. Kind of started off slow, but, they were able to pull away in this game. So now you got Michigan playing Ohio State this weekend. That's going to be the game that really does determine if Michigan does make the college football playoff or not. So if Michigan loses, I think we're only going to get 3 teams in from the Big Ten. If Michigan wins, though, and it possibly is 4 teams, the problem is, though, does Michigan jump into the college football playoff even if they got 2 losses? They got a loss to Oklahoma, who is probably just ahead of them in the rankings. Maybe that won't be enough for Michigan to get in as an at-large team at 10-2, but it's a really good chance for Michigan to definitely boost their resume. If they beat Ohio State this weekend, that's really going to boost their resume, and it might be a little bit better than Oklahoma's, but still, Michigan is a team, I still question a little bit. Yeah, they started off slow against Maryland, but then they played a little bit better down the stretch, but a couple weeks ago, they didn't look good against Northwestern. So, yeah, which Michigan team is going to show up in this one? Is it the Michigan team that we saw from yesterday, or is it going to be the Michigan team that we saw a couple weeks ago? I mean, as of right now, I'm favoring Ohio State because this is a much different team. And Ohio State definitely, you could say they were flat against Rutgers in the first half, but no, they were without their 2-star wide receivers. Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate were both out. So if they do play in this game, against Michigan, then I think Ohio State's going to be too dangerous. But if they don't, maybe Michigan has a pretty good shot. So I'm not saying they don't have a good shot, but they beat them 4 years in a row now, looking to make it 5. So that's really going to be the game that does determine if Michigan does make the college football playoff. Again, I think Indiana and Ohio State are both in really good shape. Even if Ohio State loses to Michigan, I think they're still in good shape. We saw that, of course, last year, and they still won the national championship. I think Oregon's probably in good shape. We'll just see what happens when they play Washington. But yeah, it's really down to probably, 3 or 4 teams, to get into the college football playoff in the Big Ten. Again, if Michigan loses, they're definitely out, but if they win, there's possibility that we get 4 teams in from the Big Ten. And then final takeaway, a tiebreaker in the Big 12 is looking very unlikely. So It's looking like it's a Big 12 rematch in the Big 12 championship between BYU and Texas Tech. These two teams, BYU beat Cincinnati last night. It wasn't a dominating performance, but, I would say defensively, it was a dominating performance by the defense. The offense didn't do much, but you look at this game, Cincinnati had so many opportunities, a couple of missed field goals, and then also, a fumble, I think, before they could even score in this game, kind of cost Cincinnati in this game. So they had a pretty good shot to pull off the upset, but BYU just continues to prove people wrong, and this team just continues to win games. Texas Tech on the other side did not play this past weekend. We'll see them back in action this weekend, but a tiebreaker in the Big 12 for second place looking very unlikely. I talked about Texas Tech after the BYU game. They went out, they control their own destiny. I feel like they're in pretty good shape to do that. They play West Virginia this weekend. BYU plays UCF at home, so these two teams don't look like they're going to have a big struggle at all in both of those games. BYU now looking like they control their own destiny for a second place spot in the Big 12. Utah was able to escape Kansas State. The problem is, though, for BYU, they had to lose to Cincinnati. I think they had to lose their final two games in order for Utah to have a pretty good shot to still make it into the Big 12 championship. It's looking very unlikely now because BYU did beat Cincinnati, and I think even if BYU and Texas Tech were to both lose this weekend, I think they're still going to be making it to the Big 12 championship. Now, the problem is, though, what if BYU and Texas Tech lose this weekend, and then one of these teams loses in the Big 12 championship? Is that going to penalize them out of the college football playoff? Let's say Texas Tech loses, they have 3 losses. Is the committee going to, kick them out of the playoff for that? And then same thing for BYU. They would have 3 losses, so that really could come down to that really does come down to probably, the winner does get into the college football playoff while the loser gets left out. Now, I think both of these teams, BYU and Texas Tech will sit there with 1 loss, and I think the winner will definitely automatically get into the college football playoff, but, the loser probably still makes it in. So I don't know if a 2-loss, BYU or a 2-loss Texas Tech will get left out. I mean, that's really possible that we get a couple of teams in the Big 12 in that scenario. So, yeah, a tiebreaker, though, in the Big 12 is looking very unlikely. It wasn't really chaotic in the Big 12, except we saw Houston go down to a TCU team that was like 6-4. So yeah, Houston definitely now out of it. And I think if BYU and Texas Tech both lose this weekend, there's no way that we're gonna see a tiebreaker scenario play out because both of these teams beat Utah in the regular season. Texas Tech beat them a lot easier than BYU did, but still, it's looking very unlikely. So I think this is the Big 12 championship that everybody's probably looking at, and then also same thing for me. So yeah, we'll see how it plays out coming up this weekend, and then also the next weekend when these two teams get in a rematch. So those are my official takeaways here from week number 13 of this 2025 college football season. We are heading into the final weekend of regular season play. Give me your thoughts on these takeaways down in the comments below. What were your biggest takeaways from the weekend? Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for more on the NCAA College Sports YouTube channel.